Morning, everybody. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Stephen Calberthwaite, Principal and Managing Director of Reeves and Young Liverpool, and also Chair of the Liverpool MIPIM Steering Group. As Stefan has already said, this is the third in our series of MIPIM webinars, looking at recovery in the sector. We started at a city level, moved on to city region, and now looking at a wider northern picture. So very much focus on regeneration of our great northern cities. It's been an interesting week from a COVID perspective, and I'm sure our panelists will be touching upon that to a limited degree, but it'll be great to focus on the positives moving forward and how the public and private sector can work collaboratively. So just to introduce our panel, we have Martin Farrington, who is Director of Development at Leeds City Council, Jane Healy-Brown, who is Director of Planning at Arup, Tony Reeves, Chief Executive, Liverpool City Council, Nicola Rigby, Principal, Reeves and Young, and Joanne Roney, Chief Executive at Manchester City Council. And our moderator for today is Frank McKenna, Chief Executive of Downtown Business. And I'll pass over the reins to you now, Frank.
Thanks, Stephen, and good morning, everybody. Or yeah, it's still morning, isn't it? It's difficult to keep track of time in these strange times. I'd also say Stefan has said that we're going to record this and you can share it with family and friends. Before you do that, you might want to contact me and I'll give you some decent Netflix box sets to get through, because I'm sure we are going to be entertaining, but bloody hell, surely your family and friends aren't that bored. And talking of boredom, we are not going to spend a long time on the COVID conversation, because I'm sure, like us, you're a little bit tired of listening to the daily briefings and the doom and gloom surrounding the crisis. But he's the lead for coronavirus, and he's going to give us a brief update on what the situation is at the moment. Joanne and Martin will briefly comment from the Manchester and Leeds perspective, and then we'll move on to a much more positive conversation. So good morning, Tony.
Morning, Frank. I'll just
give us a bit of an update for where we are at this moment in time, mate.
Yeah, okay. And I don't know what I did to deserve that role for the Northwest, but you know, it's one of life's pleasures at the moment, to say the least. Look, just very briefly, I think you've all seen the news on a regular basis. At the moment, the Northwest is pretty much in the eye of the storm in terms of where we are, but these issues are going to ebb and flow over many months until we get to a position where COVID is properly under control for the long term and we get back to what will be a new normal. What I would say is fantastic collaboration going on between councils and their NHS partners, with Public Health England, etc., involved. And critically important is community engagement, and the quality of leadership in all of those places in the Northwest is really, really important, because it's not just about sort of applying the protocols, etc., but it's giving people confidence to buy into that leadership. And of course, and I think it's relevant for the audience we'll have here, it's really important to give business confidence that the public sector knows what it's doing in these things. We've got our own mini spike in Liverpool at the moment, where nearly half of the cases last week that we had were in one ward. We're working very hard to contain that at the present time. And I think right across the piece, I think the message is nobody can take their eye off the ball here. But what I see looking across the Northwest and talking to colleagues on a regular basis is absolutely phenomenal leadership in really difficult circumstances. And I'm confident that with some ups and downs over the next few months, we'll get the Northwest through it and really start moving forward. And I'm sure for the rest of the session, we can talk about some of the plans for doing that. I'll leave it there at this stage, Frank.
Okay, thanks, Tony. And of course, there was an announcement on Thursday evening, Joanne, very helpfully, that Greater Manchester had obviously had an increase in its R rate, and therefore there were some local lockdowns taking place. Where does that leave Manchester at the moment?
So we knew, looking at our data, that this was likely to come. There were certain parts of Greater Manchester where the infection rate was hugely increasing. we took the decision that rather than just have different towns across Greater Manchester with different flexibilities or lockdown arrangements in place, that we would take a GM-wide approach to this, because as Tony said, you get spikes up and down all over the place. So we do have arrangements in place across GM to manage the infection rates. Predominantly they're occurring in mixed households, which is why the message was very targeted to restrictions on household mixing, as opposed to kind of place-based or venue-based lockdowns. I won't go on about this at length because there's plenty of stuff on the website around all of this, and Andy Byrne will be making some further announcements today. In the city, we have got spikes with employers in place of employment, so I will take this opportunity to say to businesses listening, they're so crucial in helping us manage safe workplaces, and please do kind of do as much as you can to enforce those rules with your employees. We do know there's a huge impact on some employees who are concerned about loss of pay if they self-isolate, even if they're testing positive. So today we are doing some announcements with government where we're calling for 4 things really. Number 1 is a recognition that there are local concerns when you do mass media announcements around lockdowns, and getting those messages out and clearly understood will need sufficient notice. So guidance coming out at midnight to take effect the following morning probably isn't the way that helps us manage these spikes locally. Clarity of messages is absolutely crucial. We are asking government for financial support, particularly to low-paid workers who we know are concerned about the regulations and the requirement for them to self-isolate. So we'll probably talk about the wider economic impact of COVID as we go, but just from Manchester's perspective, it is a GM-wide approach. We are monitoring it daily, but the infection rate is going up, and we all need to play our part in managing that.
Okay, thanks, John. And finally, Martin in Leeds, because again, some announcements around the Yorkshire region. Not sure how much of an impact it's had on the actual city, Martin, but perhaps you can give us an update.
Yeah, by all means, Frank. I mean, I would agree with what Tony said, that dealing with the pandemic is not going to be a linear trajectory, and we're going to see ups and downs, and I think we're seeing that now. Leeds, as in recent times, has been below the national average in terms of positive tests per 100,000, but we're currently at 11.4 compared to a national average of 8.8. Yorkshire and Humber is 15.4, so in that respect, Leeds appears to be doing well compared to the rest of the Yorkshire-Humber region. But the critical point is that we have seen a rise over recent weeks, and we know that in Leeds there are 2 specific spikes in postcodes relating to predominantly areas where there are homes of multiple occupation. So it's doing exactly what Joanne said about highly localised agile actions that are put in place very quickly, multi-agency to limit that. We know that in other parts of West Yorkshire, the rate per 100,000 is significantly more than it is in Leeds, but given the borders and the boundaries, there's a risk there and we can't be complacent. But in Leeds, we're doing okay at the moment, but we expect spikes, and we've got the plans and procedures on a multi-agency basis to deal with them. Okay.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for the update. As I say, I want to quickly move on to more positive conversations, and I'm going to come back to you, Joanne, if I may, in terms of Manchester. And I suppose if any place is known for developing, creating public-private sector partnerships, it is Manchester and the Greater Manchester City region. And of course, MIPIM has been a big part of developing those relationships over the years. So I just wanted to ask you what impact COVID had in terms of stalling potential regeneration projects, but more importantly, Joanne, you know, I've been going into Manchester now for the last 3 or 4 weeks, couple of days a week. Seems to me that construction is continuing, and some of those flagship projects that you'd started pre-March are continuing. So cheer us up. Tell us about some of the great things that are happening in your city.
Okay, so let's not deny the impact of COVID is going to be significant for the city. We've seen a 91% increase in people claiming benefits. 91%, I'll say that again, across GM. We've got 6,000 people furloughed, sorry, 620,000 people furloughed across Greater Manchester, which is a huge number. We know, just in the City of Manchester, from the business survey work that we've been doing, that there's about 500 companies who are still indicating that at the end of the job retention scheme, they may well be looking at redundancies. So we know that we are not through the eye of the storm yet in terms of the economic impact of COVID at all. And then you add on to that the long-term chain effect of airport, the significant impact on the airport, student numbers and the university, you know, so we're not through this yet. But you asked me for the positives, so let me talk a little bit about some of the positives. So property market has remained very buoyant, actually, and that includes kind of office accommodation and commercial, even though there is a move to kind of repurposing some of the space. But we have seen that confidence remain in the city, and indeed deals have carried on at pace. We're planning now our recovery strategy, which is around kind of not just living with COVID, but also moving on long term to build back a kind of different part of the city, a different approach to building back better in the city. We know that more people are using walking and cycling. We know more 63% increase in people using parks. So whatever we build back is going to have to be greener. Our economic strategy is all about building on our strengths, and we'll probably talk about this later. It's particularly about the connection between Liverpool and Manchester and Leeds. So very bold plans on that. And of course, we got big announcements last week around 23 million for Mayfield, which is going to be a park in the city centre. It's going to be a massive regeneration of the area outside Piccadilly. We've had the investment in transport announced, and we're continuing with the factory investment for culture, another sector that's been hugely hit. So housing, commercial, major investments, still on target, infrastructure funding flowing into the city. I guess it's what next, and how do we repurpose some of those investments to make it a greener city, perhaps moving forward, and a greater focus on zero carbon. Those are the headlines from me. There's more, particularly around the work with northern cities, and particularly the work with Liverpool that we're doing around building on our assets around life sciences, and of course our cultural offer internationally between us and Liverpool in particular. So there's a lot happening that's the bedrock for recovery. There really is a lot going on.
Thanks, Joanne. I'm glad you did turn into the positives after the initial couple of sentences, but it's clearly there is going to be an impact through COVID, but equally, I think it's important to stress that there are continued opportunities there and developments taking place. And before I go to Tony in Liverpool, just let me ask you this in terms of the city, because of course, you know, it has been a place where you've seen growth momentum for over 25 years now. It's just been an incredible success story. But this isn't the city's first challenge. It's probably a very different challenge to those that you've faced in the past, but you've always came through it very positively. And from what I'm hearing, Joanne, there is still an appetite from investors, and certainly from those people who have been committed to Manchester for a long time now, to start to reimagine the city. And as you say, you know, the announcement last week about what's going to happen at Piccadilly, those are the sort of good news stories that we need to start to really get out there so that people can begin to have some optimism for the future again.
Yeah, I totally agree. That Manchester has been through tough times previously, and we know how we accelerate development. We know how to accelerate our ideas into action, and that is through the strength of the partnerships that we have in the city. So I said there's a lot of work going on. That's just an understatement of the amount of activity that's taking place. We also have the ability, with the devolution deal that we've got, to skew money. So we've already started to repurpose skills funding in the city, in particular around digital and growth sectors. So I mentioned the challenges around impact on people of COVID. The answer to that is really localised, fast, available pathways into new employment linked to business growth. And that's what we're doing. We've seen a phenomenal increase in entrepreneurs and startups in the city, whether that's about people's attitude to work changing. Demand for flexible workspace is still there, so this work-life balance. So I think the work that we're doing, not just in the city, but the strength across Greater Manchester, we know what our assets are, we know how we build on them, we know where we need to invest to make the infrastructure changes to build on the connectivity between parts of Greater Manchester, but also outside of Greater Manchester. And we are repurposing the money that we've got available to us to facilitate that. So the catalytic projects I have already announced, Mayfield, but there was also the Biosecurity Centre is another one that we got the funding for cybersecurity expertise. We've got funding coming in through the Brownfield Development Fund, which was 81 million to GM, that will accelerate housing development in particular, but also repurposing brownfield sites in the city centre. So yeah, we do that which we've always done in Manchester, build on the anchor institutions we've got, work through partnership, get the money out the door fast to get the development underway with a shared vision for what we're trying to create in the city. This isn't just chucking money at any old scheme. As always, social value matters, zero carbon matters, real visionary thinking about what we're doing in the city. And that's how we'll get through it.
Thanks, Jo. Similarly, Tony, if we are to look at some of the positives that have come out of this crisis, the other thing it's enabled cities to do is to have a look at the strategies and the future and perhaps accelerate some of the changes that we were already thinking about. And certainly I've had the privilege of sitting in on a number of conversations where those sort of thoughts and ideas have been shared. And I think the city has come up with an incredibly impressive recovery plan. So tell us a little bit about your ambitions and what you think Liverpool can look forward to once we get back to some sort of normality.
Okay, yeah, and look, it's impossible not to be realistic. And as Joanne said, you know, cities have been hit really hard by this crisis. Liverpool's no different to that. And of course, we've got the prospect, I hope I'm wrong, but a prospect of a no-deal Brexit coming later on in the winter, which will be another economic impact for us in the short to medium term as well. And we need to be cognizant of that. But Liverpool went into the crisis really starting to fly as a city. We had big projects moving forward at pace, a lot of investment coming into the city, and business confidence really growing. You know, retailing had been struggling for the last few years across the country. Look at the numbers for Liverpool One, and right up to the start of the crisis, Liverpool One was bucking the national trend in both footfall and revenue and spend. So, and you know, it's having a tough time at the moment, but a less tough time than a lot of other similar centres. So that sort of that retailing key is still there. The idea that retailing is dead in city centres, Liverpool One is absolute living proof that is rubbish if the quality of the offer is right and the environment that you create. Our visitor economy has been hit really hard, but one of the things that we did right from the outset was to engage with people in the visitor economy, and not just people that talked about it, but the businesses themselves. And I know you've been involved in some of those conversations, Frank. And we recognized really early that the hospitality sector in particular was going to have real challenges with social distancing, with fixed costs on the one hand, and a lot less revenue with reduced demand because of confidence, and of course social distancing, meaning they couldn't have the same number of covers. So we came up with this idea of Liverpool without walls, and rather than just a concept, we've really acted on that quickly. We sorted out all the regulatory and licensing issues, and really smoothly but really high quality work, working with the sector. We've closed 3 streets in the city at the moment, and Bowl Street, Lark Lane and Castle Street, and we've brought businesses out into the street. Really great atmosphere. I was out last Thursday night having a meal. I'm out again tomorrow night, can't wait. And it is just brilliant. And actually the debate now isn't, is this a response to the crisis, right? How do we build on this? How do we make it permanent? And interestingly, a lot of our cultural institutions are now teaming up with restaurants and thinking about event-based evenings. So people buy a ticket for a meal at a restaurant, and they get a string quartet from the Philharmonic serenading them while they're eating in a beautiful urban environment. Now, obviously in January, when we've got 40-mile-an-hour winds and horizontal rain, we might get a slight dip in demand for that sort of thing, but it's the sort of response that we're seeing, and actually it's causing us to reimagine the city as a European cafe-style culture. We've really built on the cycling the explosion that we've had with people cycling, and we've opened a load of pop-up cycle lanes in the city, and we're working really hard to accelerate the plans that we had for cycling anyway, and bringing those forward to cash in on the public response to that. So there's loads of innovation going on. The business engagement's been fantastic. We started work on our plan in the first week of the crisis because it was clear to us that we were going to get a real economic shock, and we wanted to make sure that Liverpool came out of the traps quickly. And a really big part of that, we've got a big program around housing. We've got a big program around the visitor economy. I've just touched on some of that, around employment and skills, and we were pushing for a future jobs fund type model. I know other colleagues on the call were doing the same, and government have responded to that, which is really positive. But the really big thing for us is about knowledge-based industries, and really focusing on, in particular, on the Knowledge Quarter in the Central Business District. We've got 4 big projects that we can get on site in the next 9 months and get moving with. Farrington Village is already underway again, and we're still doing deals on there and in Pall Mall, which is absolutely great. But during the height of the crisis, Bruntwood SciTech, which for those who don't know is the joint venture between Bruntwood and L&G in health and life sciences, it did a deal with us to buy a 25% stake in Liverpool Science Parks. Now, in financial terms, that was significant, but it was actually the timing of that and the confidence that those two really, key players in that sector had in the city. But what it also does, it opens up great possibilities to build on the relationship that we have with Manchester and Alderley Park. And actually, Bruntwood SciTech are a unifying force in terms of that. And what was really interesting, I think this is pertinent for the relationship between the 3 cities, and we've all said this at times before, but it's absolute proof of this, that when we were selecting Bruntwood SciTech, we were really concerned initially about potential conflicts of interest. So we asked them, what are we going to do about this? So we looked at the detail. 95% of the activity between Oxford Road Corridor, Manchester, and Knowledge Quarter, Liverpool, is entirely complementary. 5% there's overlaps where we'll be competing. And of course, you can easily put Chinese walls in place for that and make sure that you separate teams, etc. But what it showed was actually, and this is where the transport links, etc. coming in the work, Joanne and I have started off getting our teams working together on joint skill strategies in this area. That we're not competing in the main, and actually the North joining up, achieving that agglomeration through making it smaller and linking all of the key places we've got in our cities and the talent and innovation there, the things that will really drive the North's economy. And that's very much what we're doing. We've got huge strengths in parts of health and life sciences, particularly in infection control, digital health, and that's really complementary to what's happening in Manchester. Leeds' strength in digital is absolutely complementary as well. And I think what you're seeing here is 3 really confident cities with substance beneath that confidence that will really move forward in the coming years, having a really tough time at the moment. Let's be honest about that, because they are. But I think the strength of leadership based on great relationships between public-private sectors, and in particular with academia playing a key role in that as well, are going to stand us in really good stead. We've got very, very clear plans. We're very focused on our priorities, and all of our partners believe those plans are really credible. And I think you need to watch out, not just for Liverpool, but for all 3 cities, in the next few years, and you'll see something really special.
Thanks, Tony, and certainly I think right to highlight that fabulous news of the investment from Bruntwood and L&G into the Knowledge Quarter, which came at a great time as well. So we'll move up to Leeds and Martin, and listen, if we're talking about positive news through the crisis, Leeds has had a announcement around its devolution deal, finally, which I know Tom is delighted by, and I'm sure you are as well, Martin. Then we had, of course, prior to that, the Channel 4 win, so you've got that to look forward to. And, you know, the miracle of miracles, Leeds United have finally made it back into the Premier League. And I'm certainly delighted about that, and I know that the City, on a serious note, actually, that's going to be a huge boost, isn't it, Martin? So, yeah, lots of things to think that in terms of Leeds, it's definitely glass half full still.
No, absolutely. And I was saying before we started, I've had many meetings with Leeds United chairman of the past in the recent days that I could probably write a book about, but that's for another day. But certainly, Andrea Radrizzani and Bielsa and you know, Angus Kinnear as the chief executive have done a fantastic job in the last couple of years to get Leeds into the Premiership, and I think the Premiership is better for it all round, really, in terms of adding excitement to another round of matches for all the clubs. I mean, picking up on Leeds more broadly, I mean, we have been in a very positive position. If you look at our housing position in the last 2 years, we've delivered more than our core strategy target, and because of the amount of development that is already on site, I expect us to make that 3 years in a row, which is really strong. You mentioned, Frank, about the devolution deal. I think that was probably one of the last things we did before we went into lockdown, and as part of that, we'll be therefore able to bring forward to DFT our outline business case for rapid transit for Leeds and wider West Yorkshire. Interesting proposals in there to bring the British Library for the North to Leeds, which will be really exciting, looking to where we have the British Library at King's Cross, between King's Cross and Euston currently, being able to replicate that in Leeds with a British Library for the North, very close to Leeds station. So there's a nice harmony and relationship there, which is really, really positive for us. And then you mentioned about Channel 4 and Channel 4 coming, and that has given a real boost in the city. And I suppose in terms of the current crisis that we're in, I think it is one that, notwithstanding the challenges that we faced, and I think they've been outlined fully by Tony and Joanne, but let's not miss the opportunities that come from a crisis. And I would echo what Joanne was saying about the opportunities in terms of green infrastructure and taking that opportunity. I mean, the estimates are that greenhouse gas emissions could fall between 5 to 10% this year. That creates an opportunity for us to lean into as cities. And if I look at what we already had on the books and then what we're bringing forward, there is a real strong carbon and resilience aspect to them. So we're bringing forward a whole catchment flood alleviation scheme for the River Aire. That includes planting 2 million trees in the Yorkshire Dales as part of our natural flood management. We're bringing forward a new active travel hub for the Leeds station, which is really positive. We're bringing forward proposals that were announced today in the government's announcement to help us deliver the city centre park as part of Vastint's 22-acre proposal on the former Carlsberg Tetley site. We've got retrofit proposals for some of the hardest, most deprived 1% wards, back-to-back housing, very close to our city centre as part of a greening agenda, but also about inclusive growth and public realm proposals. And I was very interested in what Tony was saying, because we've had some real successes in recent years of challenging why highways are highways for the benefit of the car, when if you take a step back and just pause and think, does it really fulfill an essential car highway function anymore? And often our conclusions in parts of Leeds has been no, but rather than just introduce a change that can perhaps be challenging for people as a first step, we've done experimental orders weekend closures, getting people used to it, to the point where then, so we've just completed Greek Street in the middle of Leeds as a scheme that started on an experimental basis, and we've done it on the basis that half of the cost has been paid for by the private sector tenants, because they recognise that, and luckily we were able to complete it during the lockdown. So as restaurants reopened on the 4th of July, they now have this open outdoor seating area that really gives them a boost at a time where that resilience for them is really needed. So I think there's a good story to tell. We benefit from having a big anchors network across the public sector in Leeds that covers the 70,000 employees across the big 12 public sector employers. And we have a big key account management process as well in terms of the private sector. So I think we're well placed to help orchestrate a recovery that will get Leeds building on those positive aspects that I've touched on.
Okay. Martin, that's great. A really a bit of a whistle-stop tour of some of the fantastic things that are happening in Leeds there. And listen, before I bring Jane into the conversation, can I just remind people that if you wish to ask any of the panelists a question, put it into the chat room. Don't wait until 2 minutes to 12, because we definitely won't get to your question then, and you will be frustrated. So type any questions that you may have as soon as you possibly can. Jane, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Nice to see you. And I'm sure, like me, you welcome the positive noises coming from the cities today. And of course, the point being made that where there are crises, then there are often opportunities that emerge. You have to take advantage. Your company, of course, can be part of the solution. Well aware that in each of the cities there are strong public sector, private sector partnerships of which you will be part. Equally, I just wanted to get your thoughts on how you think that the three cities moving forward can collaborate better and make this northern powerhouse we've talked about for a long time now a bit more robust, perhaps, a bit more action, a bit less of simply a market, which perhaps it's been seen as in the past. Sorry to throw up all you, but answer in your own way, please.
Thanks, Frank. Well, I think it's fabulous to hear some of the really exciting projects that are happening, some of which are continuing, some of which have been developed in response to the circumstances that we now found ourselves in. And I've spoken in the past, and including MIPIM last year, that for me, a successful city is an innovative city. And innovation really is founded on collaboration, and that collaboration between public and private partners are absolutely important to that. And I think we're seeing that playing out at the moment, and we're seeing that playing out in the successes that we're seeing at the moment as well. And reflecting on where we are now, I really brought it down to 2 E's. And they're 2 things that apply at a business level for us as employers, but also within the relationships we have with our cities. And it's that need to both engage and experiment. And I think we heard from the 3 city speakers aspects of both of those 2 E's, that engagement and that experimentation, because we have seen that, you know, it's been said by many people that whilst we're all in the same storm at the moment, we're all in very different boats. And we need to engage with people to understand that, and that allows us then to have that experimentation that we need. And I say experimentation because we need to have flexible responses, and we need to lose a bit of the fear that perhaps the public sector has, for understandable reasons, about that experimentation. And it's fantastic to hear where some of that is happening in some of the examples that are being given. And certainly some of the work that I've been involved with in city and town centre opening has been a great opportunity for that engagement, to come up with those ideas to experiment with. And that includes work within the 3 cities we have today, as well as work with Cardiff and work internationally as well, about what actually can be some quite low-key solutions that can very easily be implemented that help our businesses, particularly in the food and drink sector, but increasingly in the cultural sector as well, which is something that Tony mentioned is happening in Liverpool at the moment. So the work that we've done on Bold Street, for example, opening up there, but also the pop-up cycle lanes. I'm working at the moment with the Greater Manchester Combined Authority, and we're looking at opening up centres at different tiers. So we've worked with the City Council in Manchester at opening up the city centre, but we're now looking at the district and the neighbourhood centres. And the engagement and the experimentation come as key to making those work. And what we've found, regardless of the scale of those centres, is 3 principles that we really need to grapple with. That in going to those centres, people need a purpose to go there. And in some cases, that purpose has increased because it's a local centre they can now walk to because they're working from home more. But in our city centres, that purpose has decreased for multiple reasons. So we need to understand purpose to get people there. People also need a safe means to get there. Again, that's to the benefit of some of the town and neighbourhood centres because that's easier for people, and that's where the cities are finding that more difficult. But the third bit we've probably heard less about is actually people need to be confident when they're there. They need to show that those places have been considered and that they can have a safe place to go to and be able to, spend money, spend time and use that space. And if we understand those 3 principles and apply them, we can then start to engage with our businesses, engage with retailers, to understand actually how we can experiment. And we haven't experimented enough in the past because we always fear that we should have long-term solutions. Yes, some of our experimentation may turn out to be long-term solutions, but to actually lose that fear and then to share that learning, that's where that integration of the 3 cities comes together, is that shared learning, to share what is and isn't working in different places. And that allows us to bring together those short-term opportunities, but whilst keeping an eye on what it is our cities individually and collectively want to achieve in terms of that longer-term vision that we may already have had in some cases, and how we start to see that through.
Thanks, Jane. Thanks very much for that. Again, a very comprehensive response. And last but certainly not least, Nicola Rigby from Avison Young. Nicola, just before lockdown, we did an event in Liverpool, and I think it was Tony that said, some of these challenges that we've been talking about, particularly in terms of retail and leisure to an extent, certainly those challenges were in place anyway. And I know that you've been doing an awful lot of thinking about how we might come up with some of the solutions. So welcome to the conversation this morning. Thanks for being patient to get your turn, so to speak. So what would you like to add to what's been said so far?
Yeah, thanks, Frank. Morning, everyone. I think it's a really important point, actually, that, of course, the current circumstances have created things that none of us would have anticipated at any point. But actually, by and large, from a property market perspective, they've just accelerated. It's just accelerated trends that already existed for us. All of the panel have alluded to the challenges on the high street, the shifting within businesses, increasing flexible working. These were all things that we were already talking about, but really have just come on so quickly beyond anything that we could have ever anticipated. And I think the themes that everyone has alluded to in that context is really important in terms of the opportunities that creates for us, because instead of drifting into circumstances that we might be dipping our toes into, we're able to actually make some really dramatic and bold decisions. And I think Jane's point about experimentation is really important in that context. I think, though, the point that I suppose I would make in that context is I think a lot of the immediacy of the decision making has been absolutely critical to getting our centres in particular functioning and to support our economy, which obviously is absolutely fundamental as we come out of the circumstances that we've been in. But we've got to keep our eye on what we were trying to achieve anyway. We've got to hold our nerve around our decision making, around the projects that we're trying to deliver. And I think that's really important from a physical regeneration perspective, but also the culture of the types of places and the type of economy that we're trying to encourage and trying to create. And what I mean by that, excuse me, is that some of these decisions are almost forced into being immediate, and lots of actually the recent funding opportunities that have come out of government are a really good example of this, where they want project information turned around in 2-3 days to enable them to be funded, and that's fine, and that's all. These are great opportunities for us, but let's remember what we were trying to do, and let's not twist our projects and our places into some of this immediate decision making. Let's make the decision that some of these projects aren't right for some of these funding streams. Let's push our devolution conversations with government as far as we can, and make sure that we're still delivering on a city basis and against our original regen plans. So I think there's been some exceptional decision making, and I think that's been really important. But really, let's hold our nerve, and let's still deliver against what we were trying to achieve. And all of the panel have talked about in part social value agenda, making sure that we're creating opportunities for the whole of our communities, the low carbon agenda and sustainability. One of the questions that we've had in advance of the session was about how do you ensure that we're still delivering quality in the built environment, particularly on the back of the government announcement that came obviously this weekend around the to be determined changes to our planning system. These are areas that we've really, really got to hold our nerve on. This is the time to make sure that none of our immediate decision making compromises the bigger changes that we have to be delivering.
That's a great segue that you provided me with there, Nicola. Thanks very much, because we've had a couple of questions in the chat room about quality of design perhaps being compromised. And I think it's a great point, isn't it? Because we will see, despite the positive things that you've all been able to share with us this morning, increasing pressures for investment, increasing pressures from the government, and Nicola's made reference to the potential changes to planning, for you to say yes, almost whatever they ask. So let me get your comments on that. I'll come back to you, Joanne, if I may, because design quality, it is important, isn't it, that we maintain that.
Beth, wouldn't unmute for a minute there. Yeah, I agree. Acceleration of recovery absolutely should not be at the cost of quality or strategy, actually. So we are consulting on our strategy again for the city, because there have been changes to what matters in the city, the things that we've talked about previously, particularly around zero carbon and places, green spaces, green places, quality of public realm. But we're not just going to chase money that's dangled in front of us in order to compromise those kind of standards of design and quality that we want. And the example I'd give is the pop-up cycling lanes issue that's been around in Greater Manchester, with funding available for temporary cycling lanes, which is fine in some parts of the city, but we have decided not to access as much of that funding as perhaps we could have done, because it didn't work for us in the city to have temporary cycling lanes created when there were other challenges for us around increasing active walkways, or how we manage the volume of pedestrianisation in the city with competing transport needs. So these were some tough challenges. A lot of people were highly critical of us in the city for not putting pop-up cycle lanes everywhere, but we would not compromise on our ambition for where we want to see permanent change to transport connectivity into the city, and where we wanted to balance the different competing pressures in terms of pedestrianisation, walking, bus routes, different alternative electric transport vehicles. So, I agree with the point. I think it'll be a real mistake for us to measure our success on recovery through a lens of how much government funding we accessed. Our measure of recovery needs to be what changes have we brought in permanently that create the cities of the future that we want to see for the people who live here. Only one lens by which we should measure our recovery, in my view.
Thanks, Joanne. And Tony, aside from ordering a cup of coffee from Mrs. Reeves, if she's got time to run over with one for me, can I just pick pick up on the point with you as well, because design was something actually you'd raised as an issue prior, again, to the COVID crisis. So it was certainly on your agenda, on your radar. I could also ask you to just turn into the conversation so that can broaden this idea of collaboration, so that we can see what thoughts you're having around the Northern Powerhouse these days. We've heard a few bits and pieces from each of the speakers today in terms of how each of the cities are doing some partnership work together. But what are the other plans? And, you know, again, I think that there's going to be some lobbying challenges around those big infrastructure spends that we need to see if we are actually going to deliver this levelling up term that the government talk about.
Okay, and I said to my wife when she was coming in with my cup of tea, you just on the stage in front of a lot of people. So it's just think about walking on the stage with a cup of tea. So she slapped me as I was on the way out there. Look, quality is just incredibly important for me. And as you said, Frank, the first private sector partner session I did when I became chief executive 2 years ago, I sort of set out my position on that. And said that, you know, there's some fantastic quality projects in Liverpool and some that are absolutely not good enough for an urban environment, particularly an urban environment as beautiful as Liverpool, with the waterfront and the great buildings that we have there. And 90% of the PAPI, and I was, you know, as far as I was concerned, a few complaints came in and we got a message out that was really important. I think we've been really consistent on that ever since, and absolutely agree with Joanne. Dumbing down quality is not the way. Also doesn't have to mean that it costs 10 times more. In fact, you know, if you look at the spine that we're building on Paddington Village, 200,000 square foot office building, 60% let to the Royal College of Physicians and other great occupiers in there. It will be in the 3 or 4 healthiest buildings in the world. The design quality in that building is absolutely phenomenal, and it's within the normal rent levels that you'd expect in Liverpool. Those rent levels have been growing because of investment confidence, but it absolutely works commercially if you get the design quality right. And it's really important we continue that. And it's not just about the buildings, it's about the public space, it's about the infrastructure, looking at our cities as whole systems and joining up, and that's where the partnership and collaboration comes in, and that shared ambition for developing quality. So I'm not going to go over that. Joanne said it perfectly, but I think that is just incredibly important, and there's no way we will dumb down quality. What I will say is how projects are funded is really fundamental to this as well, because what sometimes happens is you get a quality planning application in, and then you get a load of value engineering afterwards, and people coming in with a revised application expecting you to approve it, where they've really dumbed the quality down and taking a load of cost out. Go somewhere else if you want to do that, is my message, quite frankly. And we've had a big issue with fractional funding in Liverpool. There's no point in hiding from that. Some of those issues are still ongoing, and how projects are funded is directly related to quality in many, many cases, as far as I'm concerned. And we're promoting institutional funding and other methods of funding, not fractional funding. Liverpool's been a bit of a hotspot for that, but it applies in other places as well, and it is really, really important. So in terms of the North, just being really brief because I know time is short, I think it's really, really important that there's collaboration across the North. I've touched on that already, and I won't go over that ground, but partnership working on a pan-northern scale is really, really difficult, because you end up with lots of vested interests, and you can get the big cities collaborating, but we've also got to work with the people around us as well, and the smaller boroughs. Incredibly important at a city region level, and we're all working very much in that regard. So it's about, for me, it's about working at the appropriate level for the things that you're working on. And that's about having that sort of overarching vision. So things like transport, things like high level skills, collaboration across the North, really important. With his great strengths in things like material science, when you think about Sheffield, Manchester, Liverpool, Bradford, Leeds, etc., have all got key strengths. When you put those together, those strengths can become world leading. And I think health and life sciences and digital are very much in that sphere as well. So I think there's a small number of themes that we can work on. The infrastructure issue is massive, and achieving the agglomerated benefits by bringing people closer together, bringing supply chains closer together, bringing labour markets closer to business are just incredibly important. But it's not about doing everything at that scale, because it becomes really cumbersome. And it's about having the confidence to work at the appropriate level. And often, city is too big. We need to get into neighbourhoods, particularly on the inclusive growth agenda. Martin touched on retrofit, which I know is a big issue for Manchester. It's a massive issue for us in Liverpool, both from a climate change point of view and from an inclusive growth point of view. And you need to bring those models down to neighbourhood level. So it is working at the appropriate level, being really clear about what you do and really open with people. And that way we can make the most of the North and that northern power and really make progress. I'll leave it there at this.
Thanks, Tony. I'll just bring Martin in terms of his comments on both of those things, design and the Northern Powerhouse agenda, and perhaps picking up on a great point that Joanne's just made in terms of challenging the Green Book rules of Treasury, which so often frustrates us in the North in terms of the way those calculations are made. It's something that we were discussing, of course, last year before the crisis hit, and I'm sure it's a conversation we need to continue. Martin?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just make some quick points. I mean, firstly, I agree with what Tony was saying on the issue of design. It reminded me of a weekend away about a year ago in Liverpool, where I probably bored my teenage boys stupid, pointing out all of the interesting world-class buildings and trying to get them engaged into why they look like they did and what they thought about them. I don't think I succeeded, but anyway. But certainly in terms of design, pre-app is really important for us. Good pre-application process, early engagement, and accepting there's a positive tension in that process, and that positive tension brings out quality. It's not just about architecture of individual buildings, it's about the whole urban design, it's about the public realm. And good design doesn't have to cost more. And probably the best example I've got of that is Acme's multi-storey car park, which in itself, highlighting a multi-storey car park in design terms is not common. But if anybody doesn't know that, it was Freddie Ludwig, the architect, and he simply had metal foils as the skin. Extremely cost effective. It faces east. It lights up from the sunlight every morning. As you enter into Leeds coming in from the east. And it is just a fantastic example about innovative facade treatments and how they can be really effective rather than not cost huge amounts of money. On the Green Book rules, I think my challenge as I see it, and something that Free Titters working together could probably make more traction, is when we talk about the relationship with government, I find I have a relationship with DFT. I have a relationship with MHCLG, I have a relationship with DCMS. It's then getting the read across, because I don't deliver just transport projects and I don't just deliver housing projects. I try and deliver whole solutions that work in the middle of a complex city. And that will be the same in Manchester, Liverpool, and across all urban areas. And so if we're talking to DFT about our housing infrastructure fund, and they're saying we're not making enough provision for the car, that this is an urban city centre scheme where we don't want cars, but WebTag says you've got to evaluate this. We just have a real attritional problem. And so I think how the Free Titters can work together to get a relationship that's mature with government and holistic in terms of trying to deliver joined up solutions across economy, housing, transport, culture, innovation, is probably something that we can collectively work on.
Yeah, some great points there, Martin. I think it's not a silver bullet solution, but certainly of assistance to that particular issue that you've just raised would be further decentralisation and devolved powers and finance raising powers at a greater level to combined authorities and local authorities, because for me, if this crisis has shown anything, It's that where you've got strong local leadership, strong local collaboration, the reaction can be quick. It's certainly been far more successful than what we've seen communicated from a national level. And again, I think if you look across Europe, the big success stories have been in places where you do have that genuine devolved power and, you know, regional governance models that can make those decisions at the right level. I'll get off my political soapbox now. People have heard that speech far too often, but I'll continue to make it until the powers that be listen. I'm going to finish off the conversation, unless there are any more questions, just to bring Jane and Nicola back in and just ask them to conclude what their thoughts are, having heard, as I say, a lot of positivity this morning. Jane?
Thanks, Frank. There's a couple of points I just want to pick up on, which relates to different geographical scales. And the first is the one that we've just been talking about, is the need for devolution with a centralised UK system hasn't gone away. It's actually intensified. And the Northern Powerhouse and the partnership of cities is important for the advocacy of those issues now, as I say, more than ever. I did a paper as part of the UK 2070 Commission looking at this change of relationships with regional conversations and relating it to actually the aims of the suffragette movement. And if you took out the women's bit from that and put in regional for that word, oh my goodness, it ticks absolutely every box, because it's about being part of the conversation. That's what it's actually all about. And that is there now more than ever, as we're seeing more centralised funding schemes. Great that that funding's coming out, but what it's for and how we use it, we need to get the localised control on that. So have a look at that paper if you want to see the bizarre linkages that my brain makes occasionally. But on the other scale of things is actually one of the fascinating things I find through the experience of the last few months is that people have engaged in their local areas much more than ever before. They've spent time in their local environment, walking, exploring places. You know, I feel like I do that a lot of the time where I live, but even I've found places I didn't know. There's much more of an understanding of local environments and what quality means at that scale. And we're talking today about cities, but actually our cities are collections of towns, and understanding what that means for most people is an engagement at town or district level. And so to start to rethink how we approach things at that level, we'll go back to what I talked about before about engage and experiment. There's a real opportunity to engage people in their local place than we've ever had before, because they've been forced to spend time in it. Thank you.
Some great points there, Jane. Thank you. And Nicola, final word to you.
Yeah, really, really briefly, because conscious of time. I think that the big lessons that we've learned in the last few months is the importance of having flexibility, monitoring and feedback loops in our regeneration programmes to make sure that we can respond as circumstances change. I think that's been particularly powerful. Second is about, when we talk about quality, can we please not forget to talk about management and long-term stewardship of place, because actually we can build with whatever materials we want to build with, but if they don't look good in 5, 10, 15 years time, what was the point? And I think that talking about Liverpool and the quality of buildings in Liverpool, and by the way, Martin, there's also some beautiful buildings that I come and visit in Leeds as well, so don't worry about that. But what makes them so beautiful is they still look beautiful and we still get to experience them in that way. That's about management and long-term stewardship. And then the final point, very, very quickly, you know, I was involved in a number of speaking events at the start of the Northern Powerhouse, you know, many, many years ago, when we're still talking about what this could be for us. And we talked endlessly about competition and how this was ever going to work, because we will always have competition between our cities, but competition is positive. Competition can work in our favour. And I think what's really refreshing in the conversation today for me is that we've moved so far past that. We know when we should be competing with each other, and we do that constructively and positively, but we know when we need to collaborate. And I think that's really powerful, particularly now when we're talking about collaborating to lobby central government. So really, I just wanted to reflect on how far we've come with the whole Northern Powerhouse conversation. It still means as much today as it did then. We just know what we can do with it now a lot better, I think. So just a really interesting, you know, reflection on that over time, really.
Brilliant. Thanks, Nicola. A great way to end the conversation. It's been fascinating. I take back what I said at the start. I'll share this with my family after all, and hope that they enjoy a good hour of debate amongst the the various things that have been raised today. Thanks to all of our panelists this morning, and thanks to the Liverpool City Region MIPIM delegation for facilitating this event. If you are interested in getting involved in the delegation, you're not yet signed up, then please contact either Steve and myself or one of the other people that you've seen on screen today, and we'll point you in the right direction. Thanks, speakers, and I will hopefully see you all live in the not too distant future.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye now.